Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Pain Resource. Today, we're going to be joined by Alan Charles, author of Walking Out the Other Side: An Addict's Journey from Loneliness to Life. Alan is also the host of the Alan Charles podcast and has recently been a part of the Netflix documentary Crack, Cocaine, Corruption, and Conspiracies. Alan, thank you so much for joining us today.
It's a pleasure to be here. Thanks for having me, Zach.
So, I want to start off briefly. Could you just tell us a little bit about yourself, kind of your journey to what we're going to be getting into later about your career as a baseball player and your role in the Netflix documentary and your book?
Okay, well, that's a lot. That's pretty much an outline of my whole story. So I guess the best way to start is just giving you a very short piece of growing up in Westchester County, which and specifically Yonkers, New York. I grew up in a middle class family or lower middle class, and my life fell apart and changed as I knew it when I was 9 years old. My father died. My mom, who was old, my parents got married older, so at the time, I was 9, my brother was 7, my mother was left with us, with both of us. My father's business was failing, so we were left broke, and it was just a mess. And my mother, unfortunately, was not capable of taking care of everything between money and all the other, I guess, problems that were going on. She kind of checked out emotionally. So at that point, I became the head of the household. I can give you tons of examples, but I basically took over everything going on at the house. And then eventually the house started to become dysfunctional because my brother had mental health problems. So that left me in a very tough situation, and I eventually escaped the war zone of living in my house. And it was a war zone because I was eventually diagnosed with PTSD because of a bunch of incidents that happened in the house. But my first love was baseball. And so I went away to college. I was good. I made my college team. I actually played at the University of Miami, transferred to Tampa, which is where I graduated from. And then I signed a contract. It was a scout with the Houston Astros. He tried to get me a contract in the States. That didn't work out. But he was a Cuban. He was actually in the Cuban Baseball Hall of Fame. He had contacts to Latin America. Long story short, I ended up signing a contract through him to play in the Dominican Republic, and I played one season down there. And then I was a pitcher, and bone chips and tendonitis and injuries. That was pretty much the end of my career. But that was the beginning of how I was introduced to pain pills and different ways to take care of myself, to numb things. And as it turned out, my choice of drug was cocaine, which proceeded to numb me out, and it also helped with a lot of the pain that I was facing throughout my life. So yeah, that's kind of the short to bring you up to date, which led to a 24-year cocaine addiction, which also
Yes.
included opioids and many other things.
Thank you. That's a comprehensive backstory. Yeah, thank you. So just backing up to the injuries, could we talk a little bit about what were those injuries? I know it was an arm surgery and some tendonitis, right? So how did that? I mean, it ultimately did end your that professional career, but how did that affect your trajectory into the major leagues and ultimately into your first opioid use?
Well, it the injury itself, I got it in college, and it lasted a while through my college career, which I think was part of the reason I never got drafted, is because I didn't play enough in college because of the injury. But fortunately, I was able to come back. My arm was better. I just didn't grow as hard as I used to. So I was basically damaged goods, and I was fortunate enough to sign and play in the Dominican Republic. I had an opportunity. The following year, I went to spring training, and I wasn't able to get a contract here in the States. So I ended up having an opportunity to go down to Mexico to play professionally. And I just decided, I was 24 at the time. I had my college degree, and I just thought, you know what, I got as far as I could. I lived the dream. I got further than most people, most boys that want to play baseball and have that as their dream, which was mine, that I actually got to play professionally. And it was absolutely amazing. But then again, I would take painkillers from time to time because of my arm. I mean, I had some severe arm problems. That started in high school, where the night after I pitched, I couldn't go to sleep. I couldn't move my arm, and I was up that whole next day. I couldn't even shave until 2 days after I pitched, was when I was able to finally get my arm up. And I lived that way just because I love baseball. And even after the operation, I dealt with tremendous pain, and I didn't care. I just wanted to pitch, and I would do anything I could to keep playing.
So how do you so how did you end up coping with that kind of pain? And does that still affect you today? Do you still have some arm problems? Like, so how do you manage it now versus back then?
Well, you know what? When I was playing professionally, everything was geared up to being in best physical condition I am or was, and whatever I needed to do so that I can go out and actually throw with as little pain as possible. So at that point, I did use some opioids, and I used Indocin. I used a bunch of anti-inflammatory pills and things like that. But after that was done, I played not professionally anymore, but because I loved it so much, I played the men's senior league. But I didn't have to worry anymore about my fastball being 90, 92, 93. I could throw 85, 87, and I was able to do that without really pushing my arm too hard. And so it ended up where the pain pills and anything to deal with pain kind of disappeared, because I was no longer under the pressure to perform the way I needed to perform to be able to make it. So I then stopped using opioids. It wasn't an addiction. And I just kind of used them as needed, not necessarily a doctor writing me a script that I needed, but needed it enough so that I can continue playing baseball.
Is that still something that bothers you today? That arm pain? That's in the
No,
past.
my arm. It eventually, when I didn't have to throw in the middle 90s anymore, and I was able to just go and relax, my arm got better, and I was able to throw. I could get up and throw strikes from my sleep. So it was all good, and I was able to play all the way up until my early 40s, and then my knees finally went, and then I had to have 2 knee replacements. Again, I was able to get opioids, but by that time I was in recovery, and I had to talk. Or I didn't have to, but I decided that I went through the whole pain recovery through the rehab from the knee replacements, speaking to my sponsor, because I needed to let my sponsor know that, because it was a cocktail. I don't know if you know anything about knee replacements. They're horrific.
Yeah, I can imagine. Yeah.
So they had, I mean, my knee was swollen like a basketball, and I had ice packs on it. It was just the worst thing. I did it twice. I don't know how I did it, but especially after walking in the first time, it was so painful. And so I would have oxycodone, I think, every 4 hours. And then after 2 hours, there was Percocet or something else. So that was every 4 hours. And we were alternating every two, so that I would always have something in my system. It's just kind of the way knee replacements go. And after about 4 weeks of doing that, which most people, I believe, get addicted, whether you have any intentions or not, just by taking them, you're going to get addicted. That's just the way it works. And after I was going to take it for 5 weeks, and every time I went for surgery, my sponsor would tell me, Alan, you're an addict. It's 4 weeks. You need to get off it. So I would hem and haw for a day or two, suck it up, deal with the pain, and usually by 4 weeks and 2 days, I'd be off. And then I'd have to go through a 2 or 3 day, what's the word I'm looking for? Kind of a detox, where I can't sleep. My mood changes. I'm angry inside. I'm just beside myself, and it's a horrible feeling to go through withdrawal.
Yeah.
I've done that. Actually, it's a whole nother story. My life's just been crazy, but I actually had a third knee replacement, even though I only have 2 knees. One of them didn't work, so I had to go through the entire process again.
Is that something that you found difficult to deal with, being in recovery, having to use an opioid, or is that something that you kind of knew you had to do, so you geared up for it?
You know what? It's something that I had to do. I manipulated doctors when my knees were hurting before all the knee replacements because I was in active addiction. So I realized that opioids made me feel good and they mixed well with cocaine. At least that's what I found. And unfortunately, well, fortunately, I used them, but I stopped. They really didn't do anything for me and or anything big. So at the end of the day, I was pretty fortunate. Even going in post recovery, now that I have, and I'm in recovery 13 and a half years, but at that time, let me see, knee operations were, oh, I'm trying, 2012 to 2015. So I was already in recovery for about 4 years. So I just felt it was the right thing to do talking to my sponsor about it, but I didn't have any, I was careful because I know I'm not cured from addiction, but I really didn't have that draw with the opioids. So I was concerned enough to walk through every day. Listen, I just took the last pill. He said, call me when you're taking the next pill. I just took the next pill. That's all you're taking? Yes, that's all I'm taking. And, you know, I want to make sure because you can't just talk to, you got to talk if you want to walk the walker, however the saying goes.
Yeah. Just kind of backing up a little bit, we touched upon the sports injuries in the first opioid, you know, like your first usage of that. Do you think those injuries and that use of an opioid played a role in your later addiction in life, or do you think those are two unrelated instances? Were you using at the time when you got injured, or
No, see, when I was playing baseball and I stopped playing professionally, my last season I was 24 years old. Um, I I did not abuse any drugs. I was very healthy. I was very careful. If I did have something go on and somebody said you need to take a Percocet, I took the Percocet. If they said, you know, here's you're only getting three, that's fine. If I needed the anti-inflammatory pills, everything was intended to just be about baseball and how to maximize my body. So I do not believe that early usage affected me, but what I can tell you is in the middle of the addiction, when I started having knee problems on and off, I went to some doctors and I got opioids and it was working with the cocaine. So, you know, even though I said before I didn't feel that I had an opioid addiction during that time, I did abuse opioids when I was in my addiction, which was after I finished playing baseball. So I qualify for pain management and addiction to opioids.
Yeah. So on the topic of substance abuse, so we mentioned in the beginning of the interview, you were recently a part of the Netflix documentary entitled "Crack: Cocaine, Corruption, and Conspiracies." So could you walk us through your experience with addiction and how you came to be a part of that documentary?
Yeah, those are all really good questions. I guess timing has a lot to do in life with everything, and my timing happened to be right while history was being written at that time about drugs, crack cocaine, opioids, all the things that were going on. But crack cocaine was so much cheaper because in the inner cities, that's what people were buying and using and stuff like that. And growing up in Yonkers, which is Westchester, it's just north of the Bronx and Washington Heights and different areas. And I started going down to Washington Heights to buy my cocaine. And I kind of stuck out like a sore thumb because there weren't many people that were as white as I was there. There might have been lighter skin, but most of the skin down there was, black and Latin, all different types of people from all over the place. But it was a Dominican area, and it's a whole, not to get off of days, but I mean, in a sense of coincidences, I drove up, I found the place that I thought was dealing because I saw lookouts and this and that, and I drove up to the guy and I said, can I get something here? And the guy looked at me and he said, you're Alan Charles. And that's Charles, I guess in Spanish they call me Charles. And he looks and he says, you're Alan Charles. And I just laughed. And I said, how do you know? He said, my aunt lives down in Dominican Republic. I go there every summer. I saw you 2 summers ago down there and pitched for my home team. So at that point, I had a connection. Now I valet parked with him and got ushered, and I had an escort in to buy my cocaine.
So,
But I didn't need to get off base. But
no,
so
no.
that's what was happening. But in essence, what was really happening was this was going on. It was the late 80s. It was the early 90s. And cocaine was all over the place. Crack cocaine was less expensive. It was being brought into the inner cities. They were cooking it. They were making crack. And so I sent an application in, or actually I answered an email because I saw they said, have you ever used crack cocaine? We'd love to hear about your background, blah, 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 for a documentary. So I had no idea what it was for. As it turned out, it was for the Netflix documentary, as you shared, crack and then the cocaine conspiracy and whatever. But the reason that I fit into the documentary is because I was a testimony to what was going on. So even though they interviewed me for about an hour on all different things, most of what they used my pieces for were to kind of bring everybody to what was going on in Washington Heights. And so I was the example, or, I was giving documentation of this. Yes, this is what happened. And, as I went back and started to think about everything going on, I did get a lot of breaks. I mean, I should have been arrested. I stood out like a sore thumb. I had cops pull up alongside of me looking at a car, and they see a white guy. One guy shook his head at me. Another time, cop opens his window. He goes, "What are you doing down here?" And I said, "Oh, I'm just picking up something." He looked at me and he goes, "Get the F out of this place. What are you doing? You're going to get your ass arrested." And so those were the things. Is that white privilege? I don't know. Did I not get arrested because I was white? Probably. Or, maybe I just got lucky and happened to be at the right place and the guy didn't want to stay all night writing, arresting me and writing it up. So who knows what the reason is, but I was a witness to all this stuff that went on in the documentary and all of the crime and how bad it was and how dangerous it was. I mean, here, I'll give you an example. This will be the last part of the documentary piece, unless you have some more questions. But one of the days, I was sitting in my apartment. I'd gotten back a couple of hours earlier from going to my spot and getting cocaine. And all of a sudden, I see news, and they're showing, it says Washington Heights, and they're showing an apartment with 2 people with their necks sliced. And they said, gangland-style hit in drug den. So as they panned back and they showed the building, that was the building that I would go to get my cocaine. And I'm like, oh my God, what am I going to do? I'm not going to be able to get my drugs anymore. So I came up with the wise decision after using cocaine for a few hours to drive back down there to make sure that I can get back in that building if I need to get more coke. And of course, there was police tape and it was roped off. And so I drove around and went to another lookout person, told him that my building is under siege. And he said, "Oh, I'll supply you." So I got a new drug dealer. But there's crazy stories. I'm sure you've.
Yeah, it was a very powerful document. Yeah, it was a very powerful documentary. For those that don't know that are watching, the documentary kind of covers the crack epidemic of the 80s and 90s. And throughout all of the the corruption and the conspiracies that surround it. Yeah, so that's very interesting story. So moving forward now, so we talk about you getting sober. What year did you get sober?
It's interesting because I started to get sober. Okay, so I started using approximately end of 84, 85, and I had a 24-year addiction. So that works out to my sobriety date being December 8th, 2007. But even though I stopped on December 8th, 2007, being my last day that I felt it necessary to have to use cocaine or drink or take opioids actively as an addict. But what had been going on is I had been through 2 marriages. the first marriage in 1994. We didn't even stay married 6 months because I was a full-blown cocaine addict. So this is my first attempt at trying to get sober because I didn't want to lose the marriage. I agreed to go to a rehab for 30 days. I didn't make it 2 days out of the rehab and started using it again. So that was the end of that relationship. I got married again, and I met somebody in 2000. We got married in 2001. And within 4 months of the marriage, I was already back in an I was back in an inpatient facility for a short period of time, and that's all that my insurance would pay for. Came home, was gun ho about staying sober, went back to started using again, went back to rehab right before 9/11. Spent 9/11 in a rehab. Was there for 4 months. I was originally going for 2 months, but I came home the day after the 2 months. I used that day, and my wife looked at me and said, "You need to go back." So I went back, and I was there for another 2 months, and then I came home. I guess I was sober a few months, and I relapsed. And that progression and that kept going on for 7 years. That took that whole thing with my last ex-wife who I had children with. That started somewhere around 2001, that I was trying to stop because I was getting married, and I tried and tried and tried, and I could not get it. And finally, that led to me at the end losing everything, where I lost. So between the two marriages and my 24-year career of being a drug addict and alcoholic and all the things that I wasted because of this horrible disease, I lost everything. I lost 2 wives, children, cars, apartments, houses, pets, money, and I ended up homeless at the end. So
Yeah, that's
so
powerful.
it took 7 years for me to finally get through this and find my first 365 days. That was the hardest thing I've ever done.
I can imagine. Yeah. Well, when we talk about addiction, a lot of people don't realize, as you've alluded to, it is a disease, and it needs to be treated as such. But in that journey, so I've spoken to people in the past. We've done interviews with people who have struggled with addiction, and a couple times they've alluded to this aha moment. So was there any moment in that that 7 year kind of gap, or of keeping, like, the relapse keep coming? Was there a moment when you kind of knew that you could do it? Was there something that kind of flipped, or did you wake up one morning and you went, I can actually do this thing?
Here's my aha moment. I had been seeing a therapist for years, and she was an addiction specialist. Matter of fact, she had been sober 20-something years, and was a therapist. So I had been seeing her before, right when I started dating my ex-wife, who I married and had children with, Stacy. And I was going. We started first with couple counseling because we had couple problems, and the couple therapist dressed me to the side and said, you're not going to be able to be in this relationship if you don't get your using under control. And I obviously said I don't have a problem, which most addicts say in the beginning. And so she suggested I see this therapist, and she gave me the name, and I went to see the therapist, and her name was Nancy, and she was just an angel. And she didn't push me in the beginning. She knew I was going through stuff. She knew that I probably had an addiction problem. Not probably. She was sure that I had an addiction problem. But I kept fighting it. No, I don't. And what ended up happening is she was with me through the entire thing. Most therapists, my understanding, which is the right thing to do, if you're using drugs or alcohol, or you're in that type of state, and you're doing therapy, most therapists, if they're aware of that, or you look like you're going through stuff, they're not going to continue to see you because they're talking to the disease. They're not talking to the person. Right. But for some reason, she just wouldn't give up on me. There was one time I called, I said, Nancy, I can't come in, I used. She said, Alan, you're coming in and you're going to sit here, but you're coming in. And I came, I was ashamed, I sat there, I talked to her a little bit, and that was it. She tried so many different things with me, but what ended up happening is I had lost everything. So I was at the bottom. My wife had filed for divorce. She got an order of protection. I couldn't see my kids. I tested positive while I was going through the divorce in court. I got fired from my job because I tested positive. I mean, I'm headed straight down. And Nancy, I hadn't seen her probably a month, 6 weeks, 8 weeks. And she called me and she left a voicemail. Now, I never would pick up my voicemail while I was using, and usually I waited till a while after I was done using, so I feel better. This one particular day, I'd been partying on and off for 6 months, 6 weeks, I mean. I'd been up for like 2 or 3 days straight. I fell asleep, passed out, crawled to the bathroom at some point during the night to get up. I saw the blinking thing on my phone. I don't know what prompted me to pick it up, but I picked it up, and it said, "Alan, this is Nancy. It's time to come back. You're going to die. You don't have to die. Please call me." Hung the phone up, went back into bed, passed out, woke up 4 or 5 hours later. It was late morning, early afternoon, I don't remember. I saw the phone, and I picked it up to listen to the message again. And I don't know what that was, but it came through clear that I'm going to die, I don't have to, and that I need to come back to the meeting. So I picked the phone up and I called Nancy. She said, "Alan, swear to me, promise me that you're going to go to a meeting where everybody knows you and they can see you in your eyes." And I promised her. I said, "I have no cocaine left. I'm going to go to sleep. I promise you I will go to the meeting." And it was an 8 o'clock Monday meeting. I went to the meeting. People looked at me because I'd used for days and days and days. My skin was ash gray. And I walked in, and I knew everybody. People just shaking their heads. And here I am back counting day one. And that was the last time I ever had this.
Oh, well, congratulations on that sobriety. I mean, it's not many people can say they've done that.
Man, I'm very fortunate.
Yeah. What do you think is your biggest takeaway that you've taken away from this whole journey with battling to become sober? What do you think you would tell people your biggest takeaway from it is?
My biggest takeaway would be that I proved to myself that I could do anything, no matter what the situation is. And that's something that I talk about quite a bit on my radio show and in some of the presentations I do around the country when I talk about the dangers of drugs and alcohol. And it was kind of a contrast. It's interesting because I thought, especially the way I grew up, I didn't have a father. So I ended up doing everything for myself. And if I didn't shake things and make things happen, in my mind, they weren't happening. So I learned how to be very assertive and very aggressive. Well, what happened was, and I'm sure, this is not uncommon, I just felt like I can do anything. I can get myself out of any situation. Whatever it is, I'm going to succeed with it, or I can get through anything. Well, what started to happen is I couldn't stop using cocaine. I was able to be successful in a lot of different areas, but no matter what I did, when I tried to stop using cocaine by myself, I would hide it. I lived behind a mask for years and years and years, and I just wasn't being honest with anybody. So at the end of the day, what the biggest thing that I found out was that I can do anything, that I really am capable, no matter what. I am not giving up. And the other thing is that I didn't get sober by myself. I did it with the group of recovery. And there's a lot of different ways. I don't poo-poo or look down at any other, you want to be abstinent, that works for you. You want to find Jesus Christ, that works for you. You're Jewish, whatever your religion is, Muslim, that you're going to get religious and that'll stop you from using, that's great. But everything that I've seen personally, if you follow a program of recovery, and you don't even have to do it close to perfect, but if you follow it, you're going to get sober. That's kind of just what happens. It works. I've seen it work. I've seen I've seen hundreds, if not thousands, of people die from this disease. So, my biggest takeaway is never to give up, and that recovery is done as a we thing. You don't get better by yourself.
Yeah, such a strong message. Thank you so much. Um, just going to circle back to, you mentioned your podcast and your touring around the country. So I would like to just touch upon that. I know you have a book. It is titled Walking Out the Other Side, An Addict's Journey from Loneliness to Life. And you also mentioned the podcast you're part of. Could you touch on those really quickly and let
Sure.
people know where they could find you and where they could listen to you?
Absolutely. So you Google Walking Out the Other Side, the name of the book, as you shared, Walking Out the Other Side, An Addict's Journey from Loneliness to Life. And it's a memoir, and I tell my whole story, and I don't leave out there's no punches. I tell it exactly like it is. And from there, that led me to my program, or my radio show that I do live every Thursday, and then it's available through all the podcast sites, so Spotify, iTunes, it's all over. The name of the show is The Alan Charles Show, and it's addiction, recovery, and reality. And the key piece is the reality, because I don't sugarcoat anything. I call it as it is. I tell you how I see it. It's my understanding and my beliefs, and I am freely open to share about what's going on. So I don't have any secrets. I put it out there. And, between the book, my radio show, and then, unfortunately, the speaking thing is kind of, once the pandemic hit, that
Yeah.
kind of put me and a lot of other speakers out of business. I think, it's starting to pop up, and there's some Zoom stuff. I've got a couple of things coming up, but, hopefully we can get that going again, because I think we're now in a horrific time. This pandemic, so many people have relapsed, so many others have become addicts, whether it's drugs or alcohol, opioids, and that's another thing. Opioids, everything that I'm reading, I think they said in the last calendar year, but this was during the pandemic, we lost 88,000 people that died of drug overdose.
Yeah, it is a problem. Yeah, I think that's really great. I think we've got really everything that I came here asking for. Alan, thank you so much for joining us today. I will be sure to link all of Alan's links to his Spotify, his book, and as well as his personal website down below in the description. Alan, thank you so much for joining us today. It's been a real pleasure talking to you.
Thank you. It was a pleasure talking to you, Zach. Thanks for having me.